Well, let me tell you about a gentleman named Isaac Lidsky. When Isaac Lidsky was an adolescent, you may have seen him on TV because he started a very popular TV sitcom called Saved by the Bell. He graduated from Harvard at the age of 19 with an honors degree in math. When he was 20, he founded an internet advertising technology company, which he later sold for $230 million. In the meantime, he attended Harvard Law School. He was the editor of the Harvard Law Review, and after graduating, he served as a law clerk for 2 Supreme Court justices. Today, he runs a successful construction company in Orlando, Florida, making concrete structures both for commercial and residential buildings. So it's people like Isaac Lidsky that make me feel like a slacker. Especially considering an interesting fact about him. When he was 13 years old, he developed a rare retinal degenerative disease that left him completely blind within 10 years. In 2016, he published a book called Eyes Wide Open, Overcoming Obstacles, Recognizing Opportunities in a World That Cannot See Clearly. One of the anecdotes Isaac tells in that book is about a little girl named Dorothy. Dorothy was fascinated by goldfish, and her father explained to her that fish swim quickly by waggling their tails to propel themselves through the water. And without hesitation, Dorothy responded, "Yes, Dad, and fish swim backwards by wagging their heads." In her mind, that was a fact that was true as any other, and fish swim forward by wagging their tails. It just makes sense, obviously, that they can swim backwards by wagging their heads, and Dorothy believed that to be true. Now, Isaac tells that story to illustrate how our lives are full of fish that are swimming backwards. Because we make assumptions and faulty leaps of logic. We hang on to our bias. We are convinced that we are right and others are wrong. We often fear the worst. We tell ourselves what we can do and what we cannot do. In other words, in our minds, fish swim in reverse by wagging their heads. We take for granted, like Dorothy, that's just the way things are. As a blind person, Isaac says that every day he confronts the incorrect beliefs that people have about his own abilities, but going blind, he says, taught him to live his life with his eyes wide open. It taught him to spot all those backward swimming fish that our minds create. Going blind put those kinds of things into focus for him. And in the story we heard today from Luke's Gospel, the risen Christ encounters 2 men on the road to Emmaus. Even though they had been among the followers of Jesus, Luke tells us that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And that's a really intriguing thing to say, that their eyes were kept from recognition of the truth. So they had heard the story of Jesus' resurrection, but clearly they found that too astounding to believe. Only when they shared a meal with Jesus did they recognize him. And when they did that, Luke tells us their eyes were opened. Now, of course, their eyes had been opened all the time. Now, at least in the way we usually think of seeing things quite clearly. They trusted their eyes in the way we have all been taught to trust what we see. What you see is what you believe. Seeing is believing. But in that encounter, they saw things in a brand new way. And we've all experienced that because we all go through life with a certain set of assumptions about how the world operates, and over time we develop biases which become hard and fast beliefs, and plenty of those beliefs really we actually need to navigate our daily lives safely, and those beliefs can bear themselves out to be accurate time and time again. It's really very basic stuff. We need to look both ways before crossing a busy street because we believe there's a decent chance we may get run over if we don't look. Now, We're teaching our 2.5-year-old granddaughter Zoe that rule. And you're going to be hearing a lot about Zoe in sermons in the future, by the way. We need to wear warm clothes outside when the weather turns cold, because we believe if we don't, we'll be uncomfortably cold. We believe that we need to put time and effort into a project because we believe the results will always be more successful the harder we work at it. And there are other beliefs we can hold on to that unintentionally, though, blind us to reality. Those beliefs, those are our backward swimming fish. For instance, once someone has committed a crime, even though they may have served their time, and even though they've gone through a training or rehabilitation program, and even if they have stayed on the straight and narrow, we can still believe that person is always going to be a criminal. If someone is voted in a certain way, and it's not the same way we would have voted, we can believe they must have completely different values than we do, that they follow a different moral compass. Maybe their compass is just broken. So they may be suspect in our eyes, and we can assign all kinds of motivations to them that we don't like. We can even put thoughts in their head because we believe someone of a certain political persuasion different from our own always thinks this way or that way. There's a reason for having those kinds of faulty beliefs and making assumptions about others, of believing in those backward swimming fish, because how we see anything, any belief we might have, has a lot to do with how our brains are constructed. Now, first of all, what we sense, especially our visual sense, is shaped subconsciously by other things that we already believe to be true. So to create the experience of sight, our brain references our understanding of the world in different ways. Other knowledge, our memories, our opinions, even our emotions. This is why two people standing at the same street corner, witnessing the same traffic accident, can make completely conflicting eyewitness reports about what happened. That's because our brains construct the reality of that traffic accident based on a lot of other factors, like our beliefs about people who drive certain kinds of cars. Now, how many of us, be honest, have beliefs about the kinds of people who drive Tesla Cybertrucks? That wasn't hard, was it? Yeah, me too. Or what about just our beliefs about certain kinds of drivers? I want to ask you to raise your hand here. Their age, their gender, their ethnicity. So our reality, our truth, our beliefs are impacted by how we feel and how we're taught to believe. Our brains construct our own reality, and we believe it. Maybe that explains what happened in the story about the road to Emmaus. Those two men were seeing Jesus. They were talking to him. But their beliefs about reality kept their eyes from truly seeing him. But our sight and our other senses are not the only ways we create our reality. Let's take fear. Let's take fear as just one example. Our fears distort our reality. Under the warped logic of fear, anything is better than the uncertain. Fear fills the void at all costs, substituting what we know with what we dread. Instead of the ambiguous, fear offers up the very worst. Rather than reason, fear causes us to make assumptions. So fear replaces the unknown with the downright awful. It drowns our ability to think critically and replaces that with a flood of disruptive and negative emotions. Okay, so how do we avoid all of that? And how did those who sat down to break bread with Jesus have their eyes open to a new and positive reality? Well, we ought to pay careful attention to what these two followers of Jesus did in this story because it's critically important. First of all, as followers of Jesus, on that day, their reality, well, it was fear and despair and confusion. That was their mindset. They didn't know what to think about everything that had happened with the death of Jesus, and now these wild stories of the empty tomb and the risen Christ were circulating, and none of it matched up at all with their beliefs about how the world operates. But here's the important part. In spite of all that, in spite of it being the worst, most confounding weekend of their whole lives, they invite a total stranger, whom they don't recognize as Jesus, remember, who is telling them things they barely understood. They eagerly invited him to stay with them and eat with them. They provided hospitality. And you'll hear me say this again and again, but I say it so much because I'm convinced it's absolutely true, so I suppose it's my own bias, and it is repeated over and over again in the Bible. Whenever we express hospitality, when we're welcoming to total strangers, people we may not fully understand, we open ourselves up to wonderful, fresh insight. And by the way, our congregational meeting right after church has a lot to do with how we practice hospitality. But through hospitality, the holiness within it, that stranger who comes to us, is revealed to us, and we are amazed at our new way of seeing reality. Hospitality is like some kind of mysterious key that unlocks the ability for the new reality of God to come into our lives. In our lives and in our relationships, in our hearts and souls, and in our church, our backward swimming fish, they don't do us any good. Our preconceived beliefs, our blindness about people add up to missed opportunities and unrealized potential. They create fear and insecurity and distrust instead of boldness and courage and trusting in God's goodness. And if any of us, myself included, find that we are ever fearful or feeling insecure or distrustful, we need to be very alert to that. We need to do some serious self-reflection and ask ourselves if maybe those beliefs causing those feelings, are they based on fear? Are they based on preconceived notions? Are they based on our conviction that fish swim backwards? We need to ask, am I really being able in this moment to allow my eyes to be opened? You know, we have, as a church, so many opportunities to provide hospitality and to be opened to a new way of seeing. It happens every single Sunday when a guest visits us. And any time we're opening doors to those who may have been treated elsewhere as if they were strangers. But we are not, and Jesus was not, in the business of treating anyone as a stranger. We're called to regard everyone as a welcome guest. And we have the amazing opportunity and the calling to be a place where no one is a stranger here and everyone belongs. And the breaking of the bread and opening of ourselves to all people, we're also opening ourselves to a new way of seeing, where everyone is understood as a beloved child of God. And today in our world and in our country and in this community, that way of seeing our neighbors is so needed. If we do nothing else as a church, but be a community that's dedicated to intentionally providing welcoming, belonging, and sharing God's love, that is a true gift to others, and it is a blessing for us. Helen Keller once said that the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. We are a people, and we are a church with the willingness and with the vision to have our eyes open to the holiness that's within every person and within each of us, and to share that new vision of everything that God makes possible.